Hello, I'm Michelle Leduc Catlin. Welcome to episode 3 of season 2 of Trued Up, the podcast that invites you to be the change. This week's episode has special personal meaning to me. It's not just that the esteemed Dr. Robert Malone joins me, or that his wife and partner in all things, Dr. Jill Malone, also joins me, but that they have come to represent something more than medical integrity for me. The so-called medical freedom movement or truth and freedom movement is riddled with self-sabotage, with division and public and private attacks from both external and internal sources. I experienced this myself in 2024, and it was one of the reasons I wanted to sit down with my guests for a conversation about what keeps them going. Dr. Robert Malone has experienced an enormous amount of libel and slander, the questioning of his motives, his integrity, and even his purity, as we'll get into later. At a conference in Geneva last year, I had the opportunity to sit beside him at dinner one night and was able to ask him how he deals with all of it. His answer was honest and humble and gave me perspective on my own situation. And that is why I am honored to have the Doctors Malone as my guests today on Trued Up. So first of all, welcome to you both, Doctors Malone. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I want to dive right in, and I think most of the people who watch or listen to the show will know who you are. But I would like to kind of get into a short, maybe introduction about how you would like to introduce yourself. And then I'd like to kind of dive into what was life like for you before the COVID shenanigans and what's it like now. And either one of you can start.
Oh, I should start? Okay. So I did my PhD on public policy, specifically looking at the NIH and bioethics. And also there was a component of biotechnology and immunology involved. That was way back when. So I'm well published in the scientific literature. I co-founded 2 companies that went to IPO. I like to stay in the background. Robert and I ran a consulting business for 20 years together, focused on clinical trial development and putting together big projects for the government in the biotech space. Since 2021, we've been very focused on travel and doing our writing. We write a Substack called Malone News, which we have almost 400,000 subscribers. And that really keeps us going. We write pretty much every day for that. And then since then, we've also put out 2 books, one being Lies My Government Told Me and the other PsyWar. And beyond that, my passions are gardening, and we have 16 horses.
Wow.
An eagle, a goose, guinea fowl, peacocks, and chickens, and 3 dogs.
Beautiful. How long have you had your farm?
A menagerie? Decades.
Yeah, this is I think our 5th small farm. We've been doing small farms for a long time,
including we both. My folks had a farm, and actually Robert and I, interesting fact, probably 20 years ago, really got into farming with horses, and we bred draft horses, farmed with them, and Robert won 2nd in the World Percheron Congress in carriage driving in 2010.
In carriage driving?
Yeah, a team of homebreds.
Yeah, homebred Percherons, which are a large draft horse. Yeah, since then, though, we've really focused on a breed of horse called the Lusitano, which is a Portuguese bullfighting horse. And we've been breeding them and riding.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's our passion. It's really homesteading.
And I'm a physician scientist and a spreader of misinformation. I do this for a living, spreading misinformation. And my misinformation, unfortunately, is now, according to Joe Rogan, all true. I guess I'm going to have to lose that label, but I'm sure Wikipedia will continue to reinforce that I'm
In
a spreader.
perpetuity.
Yeah, in perpetuity. I was an academic. I originally I was a carpenter and a farmhand, and we've been married, just hit 46 years a week ago.
Yep.
From today. We're recording on a Monday. So we've kind of bootstrapped. We're not silver spoon folks. And Jill helped me get through school by waitressing and things like that. And I helped her get through school then in her PhD. And we have worked together in managing an academic gene therapy lab at UC Davis and then at University of Maryland, Baltimore. Been running since then this consulting practice that she mentioned. Done a lot of work with the government. For a while, I was working on a company called Dyneport Vaccine Company that had what's called the Prime Systems contract for all DoD biodefense products, which is kind of where I got to know all the ins and outs, and I got my security clearance and learned more things than I didn't necessarily want to know. And that's why I have all these contacts in CIA space and DoD space. And I continue to appreciate the work that the US DoD does in the medical area, because they're very focused on producing products, deliverables, things that actually work, as opposed to NIH, where I've done a lot of work as a reviewer for large grants and contracts. And NIH culture historically has been much more focused on, let's say, personal achievement and recognition.
Okay, let me just stop. So, of course, he in the 1980s, did invent mRNA and DNA vaccines, the technology, and has the 15 issued patents to prove it. Which is why we always have those patents back there.
I call them the Alex Berenstein wall. Right. Because Alex notoriously on Fox News said that attacked me for saying that ivermectin works, and that I was the original inventor.
And then our most recent endeavors in terms of academia was in 2016. We both took a year and did a fellowship at Harvard in their global clinical scholars program.
Yeah, so we're both technically graduates of Harvard Medical School.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we had a little technical glitch at this point in the interview, so I thought I'd take a moment to talk to you about programming. In my conversation with the Malones, they talk about their new book on psychological warfare, but most people think that if they know the government's game, then they're safe from it. But psychological programming is so embedded in our culture through media, education, advertising, music, entertainment, even architecture, that we can't always recognize the water we're swimming in. We find ourselves self-sabotaging and blaming ourselves, but it's not our fault. In my one-on-one coaching, I do a deep dive into your life, into your not-so-obvious influences, and provide you with specific, bespoke resources to program your life to succeed in any area you're committed to. If you're interested in working with me or in just finding out more, email me at michelle@gatheryourwits.com and let's have a conversation. Now, back to my conversation with the Doctors Malone. So we were just talking about the fact that you've developed a sense of humor about perhaps being questioned.
Yeah, they call it gallows humor.
Yes, indeed. I so appreciate that. I think we need so much more of that at this time.
We have to be happy warriors.
So let me ask you, how do you stay happy warriors?
Well, the bedrock is that we have this rock solid, longstanding partnership and marriage and relationship that gives us a stability. And for both of us, when she gets down, she can lean on me. When I get down, I can lean on her. And we're kind of a mutual support group. That's helped. And all of we live in this little county, Red County, so a conservative county in the state of Virginia, and a lot of our locals consider us local heroes, so that helps. And when we travel, we for some reason we don't generally go and do broadcasts on CNN. We tend to speak to more conservative audiences here and in Europe, and we get a lot of support there, so that helps.
I know that so many relationships have not survived over the last few years. The stress of course, the psychological warfare being waged against us, but also the fact that a lot of times there's one partner who is open to seeing the truth and another who isn't, and it's really destroyed a lot of relationships. To what do you attribute your success?
I think part of it is, well, having along what Robert just mentioned, but also we've been working together since professionally since 1996. And so we're very much on the same page. And we have always had a relationship where I prefer not to be out in public. I prefer not to be on the telephone, to be frank. I'm actually more of an introvert. And so I love that he takes that role. He's the brand. I just support him. I do a lot of the research, a lot of the writing. And we always travel together, which when you see how mainstream media has weaponized some people in the conservative movement, bringing lawsuits against them, lawfare, allegations of sexual misconduct, all that kind of stuff. It all goes away because I travel with them. So that's really, really important, is maintaining a closeness and really working together and discussing. And we talk for at least 2 hours every morning about what we're going to write, what we're going to do, the day. And also we have outside interests. I mean, our homestead, our farm here, being outside is something we both really share together.
Yeah, I think being out in the world, there's this whole metaphor of the physicals and the virtuals, and we kind of cross over both. I don't think there are many physician scientist farriers in the world. Yeah. So I'm one of them, and we kind of live in both worlds. At CPAC just the other day, we had a talk from Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs, talking about how there's a vanishing population of people that are willing and able to do manual labor. We find,
or in the trades.
Yeah, in the trades. We find that doing manual labor and working with our hands and shoveling the poop and everything else kind of keeps you oriented and balanced, and we don't find it necessary to go to the gym.
No doubt. You're actually getting a real workout with real work. So I want to go back to the media thing, because you have been obviously severely attacked in the media. And this was...
Well, not compared to Donald Trump.
Well, okay, so you have somebody else. Is that helpful, knowing that someone...
Along the lines of, it can always be worse.
That's very good. That's very good. Did you expect that when you started speaking out?
No. We've been through multiple outbreaks and been at the tip of the spear in multiple outbreaks. I was at the front lines in moving forward, actually at leading the initial development of what's now the Merck Ebola vaccine during the initial West African Ebola outbreak. And then we were at the forefront with Zika, with drug repurposing, et cetera, and, all the way back to the earliest days of AIDS when I was at UC Davis. So I've seen a lot of these cycles of fear of infectious disease and all the drama and passion that comes with that. I've never seen anything like what has happened since late 2019. And that, the initial wake up call for us, maybe we were naive, probably were. But the initial wake up call was when I got this call from a CIA officer who, not clear, was he in Wuhan or he's traveled to Wuhan? I don't know, but he called me on January 4th of 2020 and said that, Robert, you got to get a team spun up because there's this novel coronavirus that's looking like a real threat in Wuhan. And so I got busy pulled together a team of colleagues, the volunteer army, and Jill got busy writing a book on how to prepare and protect yourself from the novel coronavirus. And she's a hard worker and a diligent writer.
And a researcher. I mean, this book was all grounded in, the Cochrane reports and peer-reviewed literature. There was nothing.
Like 100 references,
Yeah,
all
it was
properly
all,
academically cited, and published it, self-published. She was really enthusiastic about self-publishing on Amazon. Boy, we're reading naive. And so self-published it, and it was really starting to build a lot of support and interest. And our idea was that through Amazon self-publishing, we could basically update it as necessary through the outbreak.
So it could be what's called a living document as more came in. Mm-hmm. And within 5 weeks after putting online, it was removed because it was against community standards. And they would never give us an explanation. And they have a policy that they will tell you what the community standard you violated. Historically, and they would never tell us. 2 weeks before, the White House and the WHO had met with Amazon, Google, and the Washington Post and a number of newspapers for a secret meeting to discuss misinformation and how they would work with them to censor. And so we believe that's what happened. We've never been able to track it down. But I just wanted to mention that was then, and this is now. And things are bad now. People do not realize how bad they are and how much mainstream media is being manipulated. And not just, censorship is one thing, like if you go to Google and you Google Robert Malone, our Substack currently reaches about, we have about 10 million views a month. His pod and our Substack usually hit somewhere, direct publishing between 250 and a half million per day. On Google, what comes up is these old newspaper articles for which there really haven't been that many views on, the New York Times, Washington Post, Vanity Fair, The Scientist, Rolling Stone, Business Insider, Atlantic Monthly, all wrote hit pieces on Robert within a 1 month period. Okay. And those are what comes up on Google about Robert Malone still.
And that's
like
and 4 years ago.
Say the first thing is scientist who spreads misinformation is like the first line. So that's what comes up, how are we going to, Google, I want to say it's 92, it might be 94% of all searches are done through Google. How are we going to combat this? I don't know. But then you look at MSNBC just fired Joy Reid. She had a show called Readout. She is literally an anti-white racist. Okay. Her rants calling Trump a fascist, she advocated that everybody who has a relative who voted for Trump, that you should exclude them from the Christmas dinner table. Okay. This literally, this is a pretty toxic person. So MSNBC, which in the US is a big network, its total viewership in January was 1.2 million people. Okay. So they fire her. Oh, great. Okay. So they cancel her show. And what do? They choose 3 panelists, 2 very progressive and one a Republican hater, to lead their new show. It's like, it's not changing. So who is their top advertisers? It's all Big Pharma. Okay. Big Pharma is controlling the narrative on these stations, and they get so many advertising dollars from these groups that's what's supporting them. And it's really quite sick. I don't know where we go, how we, people like Robert and conservative people are not asked to be on mainstream media. The censorship is real and it continues. And I don't know how we're going to break it. And it's not just for, the anti-vaxxers who actually aren't anti-vaxxers. They were just for safety. And conservative, our government in a congressional report cited that our government was censoring Robert, not only for being a quote unquote spreading misinformation, but for being a conservative. That's pretty scary. Okay.
Those are my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Wow. It's, I think you're absolutely right that people don't recognize how serious the censorship is. I mean, it's to the point now where we we joke about it, and we almost, in some ways, those of us who are telling the truth have come to accept it. You know, it's like, oh, well, you
Yeah.
can't say those words if you're going to be on YouTube.
Right.
Or, we're
That's
gonna have-
self-censorship.
Right.
That is self-censorship.
Right.
And Jill had a great example the other day involving a major alternative media outlet, one of the top ones. It was a CPAC. You want to tell that story?
Oh, you talking about Laura Logan?
Yeah.
Okay. So a friend of ours has an idea for a show that's a really good idea, and really wants Laura Logan to be the host of it. I won't go into the details because I don't know how much is
Public.
he would want public. So he approached one of the largest conservative news outlets that's almost mainstream. And they were like, the producer was like, absolutely not. We could not have that person as an anchor because her views are just, Laura Logan is not extreme. I mean, you know her story, it's horrific. And they were like, no, we could never have that person, hosting a show for us.
Because
and
because of
that's where we're
the fear of a backlash from
with
advertisers.
So where are the advertisers who are willing to tell the truth? Where
Well,
are the
okay, so the WEF, the World Economic Forum, founded a group called the World Advertising, is it Foundation?
Or association.
I think it's, anyways, they founded a group which then put together what's called the GARM agreement in 2019.
So this is the Global Alliance for Responsible Media.
Right. And then, the WEF is the world's largest corporations. It's a guild of the world's largest corporations. They all agreed to it. So if you agree to it, it means that you will not publish you will not advertise with anything that's, it started out with pornography and election fraud, and then moved into misinformation and disinformation. Okay. And so if you're one of these companies, you literally are not allowed to advertise. You would think that Mercedes and Audi would be all over conservative media. I mean, and on the other hand, Ford pickups, every rancher drives a Ford pickup or GMC or whatever. No, you don't see it because they all belong to the WEF, and they've all signed this agreement, and they're all handcuffed. If they want to have their product advertised on Google, they cannot advertise on places that are not deemed
So an
safe.
illustration of how this ecosystem works. And by the way, GARM has a group of NGOs, these small shops, that feed them the names and websites of what they identify as spreaders of misinformation.
Basically, these fact-checking
And
organizations.
they're basically little mom and pop shops that have no controls, no particular standards, but the GARM doesn't question
Right.
so they can basically wake up, have a cup of coffee and say, I don't like this person, list them, and then they're blacklisted.
Right. So for instance, anybody who spoke out against, transgenderism.
Yeah, that's a sin.
That's a sin.
So to illustrate how the ecosystem works, there's this notorious broadcast I did with Joe Rogan. And recently, Joe, in a cut with Woody Harrelson, made this statement that everything that Malone said on that broadcast is true. But after that broadcast, you'll recall what made the press was that Neil Young had a hissy fit and was going to pull all of his content off of Spotify. Well, at the time, as I recall, he had already sold all of that, and it was actually a big financial firm that was the puppeteer. But in any case, we all heard about Neil Young and then about Joni Mitchell and the whole Laurel Canyon crew. And so that was the public face of the pushback against Joe Rogan and the subsequent brouhaha with Spotify. That's a falsehood, as documented by the House Committee on Weaponization of Government. Was that the one? Or it was the Judiciary?
Yeah, one of the House committees.
So the House did a series of investigations, and they just happened to use that as one of their examples. And what happened there was not, in terms of the big impact, it was not that Neil Young had a fit, but rather that Coca-Cola complained to the GARM, and the GARM then exerted its influence over on Spotify and told Spotify that they would lose their advertising unless they got rid of Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan had done this podcast with Robert Malone. Ooh, oh boy, this is my 5 minutes of fame. But it illustrates how this ecosystem works. Of course, Coca-Cola is all woke.
Right. And so the bottom line was, because of that, and this is where government is involved, because of all of that brouhaha, Spotify agreed that they would put a ticker tape under any episode that was deemed to have misinformation, saying that the CDC says that these vaccines are safe and effective, and that for more information on
go to the CDC
go
website.
to the CDC website.
Yeah.
Clearly, the government was somehow involved in that mix, because that was the end result. And the other end result is that Joe Rogan, we believe, was never allowed to have Robert Malone back on, because even though there's been all sorts of people advocating for it, he's never been allowed to do it.
He'll talk about me, but crickets.
Yeah.
Given that, okay, so that's even, bigger than just the advertisers, right? You're talking about an organized effort.
Yeah, well, CISA is the organization that
Yeah.
coordinated all of this through the Department of Homeland Security, in conjunction with the Stanford Internet Observatory, and the Twitter files and blah blah blah.
Okay, given
and just to say it, another more recent example is USAID.
Yeah.
With Brazil, had its funds cut. Brazil had the funds coming from USAID overnight, and 2 days later they moved all their censorship laws after they lost that funding. No coincidence.
Yeah, it's been the U.S. that one of the things when we were writing the PsyWar book that we were really perplexed with, and kind of before that, was because we were traveling internationally all the time, we were stunned that the messaging was harmonized globally and synchronized, and really perplexed. Who has the power to do that? What organization has the reach to cause the same media manipulations and messaging and buying of influencers, etc., all across particularly the Western world? And I had come to the conclusion, and we published in the book, that it was CIA. But as Mike Benz notoriously says, if things are too dirty for the CIA, they give it to USAID. And so now we can see that, in fact, what was going on was that USAID, through these various sponsored organizations and, quote, news and reporter
NGOs.
Training organizations, etc., was pushing all this messaging throughout the Western world through these, in partnership with George Soros. Yes, that name comes up in the USAID files. Was the one that was pushing all this information harmonized that all flows up to the Biden-Harris administration.
Given that so much of the independent media, and I include your Substack, given that you have a large audience and others have large audiences, is there a way for us to coordinate that, given that, in fact, more people...
From your lips to God's ears.
An aggregator of, that has the money and the advertising power to aggregate and as Google does, when you go to Google News, there's nothing for conservative media quite like what Google News is able to do for liberal media. And of course, we really don't have that many conservative, if you want to call them TV stations, or, we have America's Voice, we have OAN, and we have Epoch Times are actually doing, you guys have Rebel News, but, it's really, they're not on the cable news channels. They're not, I think maybe Real America's Voices, is that right?
I think so,
Yeah.
but not OAN.
But not everywhere also. So we have a real problem. We have got to coordinate. We've got to have, it's not us. We don't have that kind of money. Somebody come in with the money to actually put it together.
So we're left with, like, for instance, we've been drawn into Parler. Parler is another one that got whacked over J6 and the January 6th protests in the United States over the election of President Biden. And so Parler now has launched a blockchain protected service that includes video streaming and also includes their own cloud services. That's what finally killed them, was Amazon Cloud kicked them off. But that's these things are still embryonic. In their case, they have a large financial backer who's kind of has enough money that the euphemisms are all not appropriate for a broadcast channel. But he let's say he doesn't have to care too much. So there's there are these various outlets that are starting up, but we're like Rumble is a viable alternative to YouTube, but it has nowhere near the power and reach. And YouTube, of course, is notoriously pro censorship.
And just to say, so Substack, for instance,
yeah, Substack is not a benign.
Let me just say, so yes, they're free speech advocates, but we can only embed videos from YouTube. And we've pushed hard, to be able to embed from Rumble, which Rumble has the codes. It should be super easy. They won't allow it.
And they require that you use Stripe. Well, Stripe is another woke left organization.
Yeah, for the payment processing. So, and which makes it so that those of us on Substack are vulnerable. They could change their policies. They could sell it, at a certain point, and then it's going to go to some liberal group, and then we will all be censored. We'll have no home overnight. So there's a risk in all these social media platforms for those of us who have alternate voices.
So we really need other platforms with money to be able to gather us all together, so that
it's all about the user base.
And we really do need, Robert and I are both small government advocates in a major way, but Google needs to be broken up. They are not operating without bias, and they control almost all of the internet searches.
So there in the United States Congress, there is active interest, particularly after this last election, in more aggressively pursuing
there are antitrust suits going on.
Antitrust action against some of these big players that act to exclude aggressively any competition.
Conservative voices.
Yeah.
So there's a few things I want to follow up on that you've said. So one, you talked about the need for, we need to unify, and yet aside from the external attacks, the media attacks from the deep state, from the powers that be, there's a lot of internal attacks.
Infighting. Circular firing squad is a great metaphor.
It's not even infighting, though. To be honest, a lot of these people, these influencers who are attacking others in the movement, they're gaining followers, clicks, likes, notoriety for doing so. They're not doing it because they actually have a gripe. They're doing it because it's a business model. And that's kind of the competitive landscape, and it's terrible, but it happens.
It's kind of it's derivative of the truth is that in alternative media, a lot of the same sins that you see in corporate media get played out, but they just get played out on a smaller football field.
Yeah.
And the kind of corporate media, if it bleeds, it leads. We want scandal. Don Henley did a song about this. If you're old enough, you might remember. But there's that ecosystem. There are absolutely chaos agents that have injected themselves into this landscape and actively promote repeatedly weaponize against different people these themes like controlled opposition. And then there's a whole truth spiral or purity spiral dynamic that goes on where, the same thing happens on the left. They call it virtue signaling, but if you are, Jill likes to give the example in the vegan world, which we used to be vegetarians. So, if you're a vegetarian, then you're not good enough because there's the vegan
right? So they exclude you. "Ah, you're not good enough. If you're vegan and you eat honey, well, that's made from bees, and so therefore you're not good enough." And this is what a purity spiral is. It's like, or it just goes down and down, and
Yeah.
the end group ends up continually becoming more and more extreme if you want to be part of that group. And so there's that going on.
So for instance, within the, if we call it medical freedom movement, I personally don't ascribe to that, but it's a term used by a lot of people. Well, there was no pandemic.
It's no virus.
There was no virus. I mean, it's just like, and if you say that there was a pandemic or there was a virus, and some of these people are even Canadians, then well, you are clearly controlled opposition off with your head. You know, it just goes on and on and on, and it is so dysfunctional.
So I have been on the receiving end of that, which is part of the impetus that had me want to sit down with the two of you, aside from the fact that you have so much to offer. But it was when we were in Geneva, and I asked you, Robert, I had just been publicly attacked, and I thought, my God, like, this is one incident compared to what you do. So I want to get into a little bit, because let me just backstep for a moment. One of the reasons I started this podcast is because as I was meeting people who were on the front lines of this movement, I found that there were ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So people who had the same concerns as anybody else, fears for their reputation, for their income, for what people thought, all the human concerns. But some people are willing to step over that. Some people feel compelled to true up to their values, to their principles. What is it in the two of you that had you be so willing to put so much on the line?
School of Hard Knocks, having gone through being risk takers and seeing that when you take risks, it's not going to kill you and you're going to come out stronger. And that doing the right thing is always more important than not doing the right thing.
So people don't generally know that I destroyed my academic career by being basically a whistleblower concerning the death of Jesse Gelsinger at the hands of Jim Wilson at UPenn, with that gene therapy death that kind of destroyed the whole field of gene therapy. Yeah. And I recovered from that. What I found through that experience was that if you act with integrity and honesty and transparency, the people that matter will support you. And so it's actually not that much of a price. It seems like a big price. And another one for us.
And it's a huge price because, you know, to the winners go the spoils. And Google is the winner. And Robert's name will always be tainted. It'll always be the self-professed vaccine inventor. It'll always be the scientist who spread misinformation. You know, and any little thing that he might say that's wrong will always be used against him. And 20 years from now, that's probably going to be the record.
That's going to be my legacy.
That's going to be the legacy because
you know,
because they control it.
Another angle. One of the guys I worked with in the invention of the whole RNA and DNA vaccine story, and et cetera, at Viscount, was a guy named Stan Gromkowski. And Atlantic Monthly, when they did their hit piece, tracked Stan down and interviewed him. And Stan said, "I'll give you a quote, but you have to report it verbatim." Now, I'm going to transgress the
do it.
broadcasting rule. So Stan's quote that he insisted the Atlantic Monthly published was, "Robert Malone is going to fuck up his chance to get the Nobel Prize if he carries on like this." And
that's what happened.
The Nobel was given for this vaccine, not the technology, not the ideas,
which is completely counter to what the Nobel Prize is actually supposed to be given for, which is new discoveries and inventions.
Yeah, and they basically justified it because
so many lives have been saved.
Yeah, and because by giving the Nobel Prize to Kriko and Weissman, they would encourage more people to take the vaccine product. That was the official position. Right. And so, yeah, we've taken some hits, but the as I like to say, not to get too philosophical or
No,
theological,
get philosophical. It's my favorite.
you know, we still own our souls. We didn't compromise. We are who we are. We acted with integrity. We took the hits. Now the data's that we saw clearly back then, but it wasn't official. It wasn't the accepted narrative. Like for instance, this recent Rogan statement and Alex Marinos's recent Substack and Twitter postings, where he goes through all the artifacts in history that he can find about the invention and concludes, yeah, actually Malone did.
But no, but there was so much data. I mean, even for, if you take masks. So when we wrote that book in the spring of 2020, and actually it was winter of 2020, like right after the virus came out, I did a deep dive into masks, and I came to the conclusion that paper masks aren't going to do anything to stop the spread. Maybe a few percentages, but really nothing. And that N95s were somewhat effective if worn properly, and that nobody long-term could wear them as a full-time method of stopping the virus, because they were uncomfortable. They stopped CO2. It's just not a pragmatic way to go.
But this gets back to PsyWar.
Let me finish. So, and I had those references, peer-reviewed references. They were available in 2020. They were all there. So the idea that we didn't know and now we know, no, that's just one example.
All of this was
lockdowns, quarantines, stopping the schools, all this stuff.
All of that, those lies, those lies, and how effectively they were propagated and basically implanted into the population makes it clear how powerful this psychological warfare
when you first spoke out, when you had a vaccine injury, when you spoke out in May of 2021, and because you did a deep dive, thanks to Dr. Brian Bridle up in Canada, when you did a deep dive into the Japanese data package for the preclinical data, it was greatly flawed. It was they threw various studies that had been done from this place and that place. They threw it all together. It was a grab bag. They used imaging techniques that were crude and
insensitive.
And that was the very earliest. That was 3 months after the vaccine came out. So the idea that there were things that we know now, sure, it's been fleshed out, but the big picture was there.
So clearly there was a lot we knew 5 years ago that still so much of the population doesn't know.
Right.
And even though the mainstream media is losing viewers and listeners, and even though we have all this independent media that are telling the truth, still you have a large part of the population that doesn't know. What is required to move that needle so that people actually, never mind the political stuff.
Ask Matthias Desmond.
No, well, ask Secretary Kennedy. It's going to require studies being reevaluated. Is going to require health promotion versus
like the one of those key hydroxychloroquine studies papers that were all lies just got retracted.
But nobody cares about the retractions. I mean, so many people in the general public, that's not news. They just hear ivermectin bad, hydroxychloroquine bad.
Having control of the web pages of the CDC, the FDA, and the NIH is huge. Okay.
So
being able to put out. Remember, Google relies on the CDC, the NIH, and the FDA for their most trusted information. When that most trusted information begins to change to reflect all of the studies, not just those cherry picked,
Google's going to have a problem.
Google's going to have a problem. Okay, and
so there's rumor.
That's one thing I have.
There's rumor. I'm not an official spokesman. That we may see a strategy within NIH of deployment of tranches of previously redacted or ergo censored government documents that will blow open the narrative, and they're going to take a Twitter file-like approach where they're just going to download, here's this, boom, here's this, boom, week after week after week, to force media to cover those stories. And then hopefully that will help break through, because the logic is that we can't get legislative change. And without legislative change, these executive orders that Donald Trump is deploying will expire basically the next time we have a liberal administration. And so it's got to have real legislative change, because it was the legislative changes before that enabled all this in terms of emergency use authorization, et cetera. And so we got to have those things on the books changed. And the only way that people like Ron Johnson assert we are going to be able to get that is not by, a lot of people are telling Ron, write this bill, and do this. Why aren't you doing it now? And Ron's position is basically we have to have public support. Legislation has to follow public support. It's the whole argument, politics follow culture. And we've got to have a shift in the culture before we can really move forward on changing the things that have been revealed to have been so corrupted and so contrary to the public interest.
Everything you take in with your senses, everything you hear, you see, you eat, you surround yourself with, is programming you to succeed or fail. Over the past 5 years, as the Doctors Malone get into in their new book, we have been subjected to an enormous amount of disempowering programming. And if you're anything like me, you've experienced a point where all the information you were taking in was actually causing damage to your health or your relationships, your productivity, maybe all of the above. It's why I produce programming to empower people and why I became a freedom from self-sabotage coach. We are living in extraordinary times, and we will either succumb to the constant negative programming or we will become alchemists and transmute our challenges into victories. We will become the people we've been waiting for. If you're interested in working with me, either in a group or one-on-one, as a coach or a speaker, email me at michelle@gatheryourwits.com and let's have a conversation. Now back to our empowering program. Well, let me ask you, you talk about a liberal, the next time there's a liberal government, but are we not, given that, the values of free speech and the values of, the right to protest were traditionally liberal values, are we not destined to repeat the same pattern?
So history repeats, right? But what is it? The third time is comedy. Are we destined to repeat these same mistakes? Well, we kind of already are. I make the argument repeatedly, because the weaponization of the term fascism and Nazism against center-right populist movements, that Benito Mussolini's definition of fascism, he's quoted as specifically saying fascism should have been called corporatism. And what we have is the alliance in the WEF, notably in the WEF UN agreement that exists. We have the collusion of corporatism and socialism. And just reel back, 1940s Germany, 1930s Germany, Weimar Republic collapses, and we have the National Socialist Party comes to power, otherwise known as the Nazis, and all of that cascade down there. So you ask, are we destined to repeat this, or are we now repeating it? I assert that basically Euro-socialism and the socialist democratic movement that is kind of burning itself out now in Europe is just kind of a prettier, toned down version of the old German National Socialist movement embodied in things like Klaus Schwab's stakeholder capitalism. That's kind of the same thing with prettier words and a little softer around the edges. And once again, it's failing. I'm stunned.
But to be truthful, companies like command economies. They like it when the government is running the
And
economy.
they love the idea
let
of
me
a one
finish.
world government.
Let me finish. Because it's frictionless business. They only have one client. Okay, that's the government. Way better than, say, 330 million customers, right? And furthermore, when you have frictionless business, means that the regulations between states, between nations, are all the same,
all harmonized.
all harmonized. So as globalists, what they're working towards is harmonization across all countries,
Based on a command economy.
Can go from here to here really easily. So they can import a car into Switzerland or into the United States, and the regulations are the same.
It's all
great.
The truth is, this is all grounded in the China
WEF
model.
wants.
It's all grounded in the China model. They love the China model, and what they're now missing is that actually there's some kind of cracks going on in the China model with how that's working out. But they're, these large organizations like the UN.
I mean, they're dreaming of if it's not a one world government, basically an EU type layer, okay, of multilateral agreements at the international level that actually controls the governments, just like it's the European Commission controls the EU, then the they want that for the world. So we all say we have our own government, but in fact, we're being controlled by international law. And government, it's not just this. This is what the WEF wants. This is what the globalists. This is what
the UN wants.
And then, of course, now they have this dream that it's all going to be run by AI, which is just so much better than people, right? It's just going to make it so much more efficient, and it's really more efficient for corporations. This is how they really see this. So we've got a big fight ahead of us. It doesn't end here. The fight has really only just begun, and the problem's only just being defined.
I want to ask you about your international COVID now crisis summit. Since you're talking about politics, and here you were going around the world. I don't know if you're still doing it, but going around the world speaking to parliaments. What impact has that had? And are you planning on continuing?
Yeah, sure.
I think in Europe, it's had a huge impact. I think we were just in Brussels speaking in the European Parliament 2 weeks ago, or Robert was. I was there, but not speaking. And the enthusiasm that Trump has been elected is huge among the conservatives. It has just like.
But that Make Europe Great Again movement traces back to a international COVID crisis summit meeting in Romania.
Right. So we had a crisis summit in Romania that led to the brainchild of having a Make Europe Great Again conference in Romania. And then we had less than a year later a Make Europe Great Again conference in Brussels. So they're really excited. But yes, it's about Trump, but it's also what Americans have brought is they've said to Europe, there's a better way. And you guys know it. You can see it. You've had it before. It's time to go back to the idea of Westphalian nations.
Or the last one, the last formal we had was in Japan, in Tokyo. And a lot of that revolved around protesting the self-replicating RNAs, which I've been told, I haven't seen it in media, have now been authorized in the European Union. There's a self-replicating RNA vaccine for COVID. But I was just at CPAC talking to a group of Japanese supporters, and they tell me that the company that is the sponsor for the self-replicating RNA vaccine for COVID is really quite angry because they haven't come anywhere near hitting their targets, sales targets, and they're seeking to sue one of the members of the Japanese parliament for speaking out, and et cetera. But I think that in that case, we also had an impact on the public discussion that we did events in Massy, France, and those seem to, outside of Paris, and that seems to have that be recognized by a lot of French folks as kind of a seminal moment that the Italians have had me back again and again, and I'm going to fly out there again next month for an extended interview, actually two. This all threads into Giorgio Malone's Brothers of Italy party. I think that the name is actually not Robert and Jill Malone, it's Lily DeFina, but she likes to, like Jill, she likes to stay behind the scenes, that has heard and her cousin Rob, who lives in Rome. They're the real ones that have driven that initiative forward and continue to do so. They're starting to be more comfortable speaking out, but in the People's Republic of Canada, that's a high risk endeavor.
It certainly is, and Lily is wonderful. Obviously, I met her in Geneva. I want to ask you about this whole conservative liberal thing, because I think many of us came from the left, when the left left.
Right.
And I think there's so many more people who still hold those values, but don't recognize that the left no longer holds those values, or maybe perhaps they never did. I don't know. How do we bridge that divide? How do we have people recognize that it's not left versus right, but really freedom versus authoritarianism?
Thank you. So obviously our approach is education, because that's where we come from and that's our core competence. So the books and the Substack and all the broadcasts and podcasts, et cetera, and speaking tours is trying to just provide people. I always say, or often say, don't take what I'm saying as the gospel truth. Think for yourself. That's the core message, is trying to encourage people to kind of break out of this fog of whatever you want to call it, mass formation or cult-like behavior, or there's a lot of different words we could apply. Some are more insulting than others, but I believe that the path forward to getting through this fourth turning, if you want to use that metaphor, situation we're in, is to encourage people to do what we do, and particularly what Jill does, which is seek many sources of information, process that in order to triangulate truth, and make your own assessment about what is real and what is constructed. Because you need, there actually is objective truth. There actually is a reality. It's not all VR. We're not actually in the matrix. It just feels like we're in the matrix. And so the way for individuals to set their minds free is not to take the red pill, but rather to think for yourself.
Right. And yeah. Think for yourself, but also recognize that there are traditional values that go back through millennia, through human history, that have served us very well. And for instance, Judeo-Christian values, a set of principles to live by. And most people on the left actually do hold those values, I believe. But they don't realize how far the progressive left has been corrupted. And so bringing them back really to the center is really important.
When we have this conversation, I'm always reminded of that graphic that Elon retweeted and made it go viral, where there's a linear representation of the political spectrum, right, left, and stick figures, and a mark of the center. And it shows, in Elon's case, the one he retweets, the little stick figure is identified as me, and it's standing left of center in his case. And then there's another stick figure that it represents the progressive left, and another stick figure that represents the conservatives. And conservatives are sitting out there on the right, and they don't move at all. They're there. That's where they are on the spectrum. And the figure that Elon identifies as self is distracted because the progressive left is running hell-bent for leather to far left and shifts the center so that now Elon metaphorically is center right, because the definition of the political spectrum has been shifted by this really radical far left movement
Right.
that has changed the acknowledged spectrum. And the conservative is still standing there at the same place he always was. But now Elon and those that you're referring to now are portrayed as being right of center.
So a certain amount of empathy, but I also believe a certain amount of sarcasm.
The memes and the humor. So Jill is the mastermind of the Friday Funnies and the Sunday Strip aggregates of memes, which I think probably our horses would be starving if it wasn't for that, because a lot of our subscriptions and a lot of our followers basically subscribe to the Substack because of the memes, not because of the thought pieces that Jill and I put together.
Listen, the thought pieces are great, but I will confess that it's the Sunday Funnies that are, it's like a breath of fresh air. I think humor is so underutilized. I think that artists are so underutilized. I want to just go back for a moment. 3 years ago, I wrote an article called How the Freedom Movement Could Destroy Itself. And in that article, I had a clip that actually you did, Robert, with Glenn Jung from Bright Light News. And I'm just going to quote what you said, because I think it's really even more relevant today than it was then. You said, "I can never convince somebody else of a truth if I'm full of anger at them. If we stay divided, it only serves the interests of our aggressor, our opponent. And if we're to heal as a community, if we're to be able to succeed, we have to come together." Today, we seem more divided than ever. It feels like, from my perspective, all the groups, all the organizations that were created are crumbling. They're self-dividing. Is this proclivity to divide, is it something that is just inherent in human nature, or is it something that's a fallout of the tactics that have been used against us?
You look like you want to say something.
No, you go.
So we had an interesting dinner. I'm going to tell a little story. We had an interesting dinner a couple of years ago with Nigel Farage in London. And he told the story of Brexit. And he said the problem with libertarians is they're libertarians. And
conservatives,
and they tend not to want to join groups. They're all strong and opinionated and individualistic. And it's really hard to get them all together on the same page. And his advice at the time was that what enabled Brexit was, he said it took like 3 or 4 years to come up with this, to develop a consensus about the language, the word Brexit, the label, that this was
it had
a thing.
To be positive.
Yep.
Yeah.
So his advice was we had to come up with some nomenclature, some naming for our side, and a lot of what people have used, like medical freedom, has been seen as proprietary by various people, not naming names. And so if you're, again, it's purity spiral. If you haven't been part of the medical freedom movement,
if you haven't been an anti-vaxxer for a decade, then you're not pure enough, right? If you just joined because of COVID, then you haven't suffered like we've suffered,
Yeah, and
you shouldn't have a leadership
even
role.
worse, if you're getting attention and I'm not, then
after all I've been through,
then something isn't fair, and you must somehow be corrupted.
And then there's the truth that medical freedom has come to mean that, which is kind of the model of being, if not against the vax, wanting more data, and then about what's happened with the insurance industry and big pharma and westernized medicine. So it's come also for another group of people to mean something completely different. And that doesn't necessarily fit. But I think, to Robert's point, we have a name now. I think the Maha really defines this movement in a way that nothing did before. And so I am hopeful that the Maha movement is actually bringing people back together.
But the truth is that we're still having circular firing squads.
And always will, because that is human nature. It is human nature.
Yeah.
And organizations crumble, they come back together. Yeah.
So let me ask you about your organization, about the Malone Institute. Your tagline or motto is "The foundation is integrity." What is integrity? What does that mean to you?
Integrity, acting with good intent, with
Consistent with fundamental principles, not betraying your fundamental principles.
Yeah, and even in the times of hardship and pressure.
It has a component of transparency. That you know, when you're acting with integrity, you are consistent with your core principles. You are committed to truth and communication in your actions and behaviors. You are open and transparent about what your motives might be, including any conflicts of interest. I think those are all key facets of integrity.
What has living in integrity provided for you?
Oh,
Well, like I said, we still own our souls.
yeah. You wake up in the morning and you don't have to question what you've done.
You don't have to worry about the lies you've told.
Yeah.
You can be in. It makes it much easier to be present in the moment because you're not constantly guessing and thinking, well, how does this fit with? I'll give an example. One of the last hits I did on Bannon, Natalie had me on, and she asked me, what do I think about the new appointments for the Trump administration in HHS? And I had a moment where I was basically clicking off internally. I had to pause. I didn't do the I just dead time on the air. And I was faced with the dilemma of, do I talk happy talk, or do I be honest? Because there are appointments that I'm not particularly happy with.
And the honesty could hurt you politically.
Yeah, absolutely. And any prospect of
and you know, to be honest, you actually have a core principle that you generally do not talk ill of people. We don't write Substacks generally, certainly about people on our side. We try very hard not to go there. So that's the other.
So I was faced with a dilemma, the horns of the dilemma once again. Do you be honest about what you think about the appointments, or do you sugarcoat it or just avoid talking about it, which is often the strategy for many talking heads. And I acknowledged that I was confronting this dilemma, and that her asking this question, I had no other choice other than to speak honestly. And I went forward with my opinions, which I tried not to be aggressive or unnecessarily harsh, but I did speak my mind. And that may or may not have come back to bite me. I don't know. I'm not in the administration. But I made the conscious decision there that I couldn't soft pedal it and not speak the truth as I saw it, and remain consistent with my core principles and basically with our brand. So I had no choice there. She kind of flushed me out, and I had to speak truth about what I thought was really going on.
There's so much about what you just said that I appreciate. And maybe oddly, the thing I most appreciate is that you were willing to allow for dead air. Because most people won't. They'll fill the space because that's like the thing you can't do. But really, to be able to just pause and really be present. And what am I going to say? Am I going to sell my soul? Am I going to say what people want me to say? And I think that you have managed to, in my opinion, to always maintain a demeanor that is respectful, but where you stand for what you believe. And, I remember the first interview, I started following you with the Dark Horse podcast when you and Steve Kirsch were on, and that was like,
Steve.
whoa.
He really hasn't. He's changed a little bit.
He has. Well, I had the opportunity to meet him, but that was, it was almost funny because you were so gracious.
He got hammered after
Did he?
that. Yeah, and so we took a cab back to Portland Airport together, and he's looking at his cell phone and he's getting really agitated, and he's just getting pinged and pinged and pinged with basically, Steve, you're a jerk, and we get out and we're taking our bags out of the back of the Uber, and he says, I guess I have to apologize to you. So, which for me stunned me, because I've dealt with a lot of high net worth individuals, and apologies is generally not their modus operandi. So to have Steve, with his interesting personality quirks, recognize that he might have comported himself better in that broadcast, and then apologizing for it, I thought was amazing. And I can forgive him almost anything, except some of the guests that have attacked me that he's had on lately. So that's
I want to leave the last word to the two of you. What do you think is next? What's next for you? What do you think is next that's required in the world, and what can people do?
You go.
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay, so this gets to the kind of core of both books. What are your options? What's next for us? This has become we are now writers and commentators and advisors. And since the election, now we find ourselves strangely being asked to play our former role as consultants to a few small biotechs that are on our side. So that's encouraging. We'll continue to live in this new business that we've developed. The Substack is a business. We treat it like a business and produce product for our customers on a daily basis that is consistent with what we've been doing. In terms of the broader population, what Jill's point of speaking for her is this encouragement that people seek multiple sources of information. And what? Go ahead.
So I'm much more ambitious about what we're going to be doing in the future than Robert. We've got two books. One of them is partially written, that is Homesteading for Health, or Health and Homesteading. So a book about that. The other we're talking about just embryonic, is a book on love and marriage, because we have been married for so long. So we've got two books in the works. I am constantly pushing Robert to have his own podcast, and he wants to, but time-wise, it's
we suffer from the tyranny of the urgent.
Urgent, yeah. So those are our two kind of, writing more books, doing some sort of more regular podcast outside of Substack, or I think are where I want to go in the next year.
We're trying to dial back on the travel, but the world seems to oppose that. So
right.
We'll I'm sure continue to speak in the lecture circuit, and travel internationally. We are fairly integrated into the emerging European center-right populist movement that's kind of sweeping. I have to really dig into what happened with the German elections just now. So I think, and we may well get sucked into the current administration one way or another. And
Stay tuned. Advisory role.
Stay tuned for that. Yeah. Various chatter. The other day I got pinged by John Cohen of Science Magazine, who I know, and he said, rumor is that you're going to be head of BARDA. And I was like, well, if that's the case, I haven't heard of it before because it's news to me. So, who knows what the future holds. There's all kinds of rumors swirling in DC about
but most of them are just rumors.
Yeah.
I hope that when you do put out your book on marriage, that you come back, because I would love to dig into that more, because I think you are I think you are inspirations both individually, but as a couple. I think there are so many people that could learn from your wisdom in that area. And I want to thank you both for your integrity and for your dignity and for being an inspiration to me personally.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you. If ever there was a time when the world needed to laugh, to let go of attachments, and to connect with the earth, it's now. And these are my 3 biggest takeaways from my conversation with the Doctors Malone. Those who practice divide and conquer do so through fear. All our indignation and raging comes ultimately from our fears. The ability to laugh in the face of all the injustice, real or perceived, gives us back our power. The fact that Dr. Robert Malone can see the humor in the very system that has sought to suppress, malign, and erase him is an example for us all. It's not that he doesn't sometimes struggle with it or get it perfectly right, or that any of us do, but that humor is a touchstone that we can use to recalibrate, re-energize, and renew ourselves. And it's why I recommend subscribing to their Substack, if only for their Friday funnies and Sunday strip. My second takeaway is a lesson I've had to come back to many times in my life. Let go of any attachment. Knowing that your legacy may forever be maligned or erased is a big pill to swallow for anyone. But truing up to your principles, doing what you believe to be right and just, is bigger. It is what gives us peace and purpose and a willingness to carry on regardless of any external circumstances or opinions. When we let go of the outcome, we can allow our actions to be driven by principles. And the third life lesson is about the importance of connecting to the real world, the tangible world of dirt and plants and animals. Not everyone can farm, but we can all find ways to connect to the earth, to ground ourselves by walking barefoot in the grass or sand, growing vegetables, and yes, even hugging trees. As the world slides into more and more virtual reality, we must remember who we are and where we came from by connecting with nature, with our nature. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and will join me for more. If you'd like, share your insights in the comments section and please hit the subscribe button. Stay tuned, be true to yourself, and remember that we are the ones we've been waiting for.